All right, let's talk about a fascinating legal idea that, believe it or not, quietly shapes global politics, business, and maybe even your own life. It's called extraterritoriality, and it's all about how a country's laws can sometimes reach far, far beyond its own physical borders. But to really wrap our heads around this, let me ask you a question. Do you think a country could just move its borders, even for a single day? Put a little piece of its territory inside a room in a totally different nation? Sounds like something straight out of a movie, right? Well, it actually happened. Back in 1943, during World War II, the Canadian government did something incredible. They declared a single maternity ward in Ottawa to be temporary Dutch territory. This was all to make sure that a newborn, Princess Margriet, would be born on quote-unquote Dutch soil, which secured her place in the line of succession. And that right there is a perfect, almost unbelievable, real-world example of the powerful concept we're digging into today. Now, that story is a powerful exception. But to really get why it's so exceptional, we first have to understand the fundamental rule that governs, well, pretty much all of international law. And that rule is called territoriality. It's a pretty straightforward idea, probably the one you already have in your head. A nation's laws apply to the people and the things that happen inside its geographical boundaries. And generally, that's it. It is the default setting for how the world works. And when we say territory, we're talking about more than just the landmass. A state's authority is like a three-dimensional bubble. It covers the land and the rivers, sure, but it also includes the waters off the coast, the seabed under those waters, and all the airspace flying right above it. It's a complete sovereign package. Okay, so we have the bubble, but what happens when you need to pop that bubble? And this is where we get to the big twist in our story, the exception to the rule. This is extraterritoriality. It's the legal tool that lets a state project its laws and its authority outside of its own physical borders. It's when a country's legal reach goes global. So you can see how this sets up this core tension in international law. On one hand, you have territoriality, the default, keeping legal systems all nice and tidy within their borders. But on the other, you have extraterritoriality, which is a very deliberate and recognized departure from that rule, and it's saved for some very specific situations. And this isn't some brand new idea. There are examples of this that have been accepted for a very long time. I mean, think about it. A country's embassy in a foreign capital. It's treated like its own sovereign territory. A ship out on the ocean is governed by the laws of the country whose flag it's flying. And military folks or diplomats who are serving abroad, they're often still subject to the laws from back home. So how does this power actually get used? Generally, these kinds of laws come in two distinct flavors. And the main difference is all about who they're trying to regulate. First, you've got laws that apply to a country's own citizens, their nationals, no matter where they happen to be in the world. A classic example is the United States making its citizens pay income tax even when they're living abroad. The second kind, though, is way more complex. This type applies to non-nationals, so foreign citizens, for things they do entirely outside the borders of the country that wrote the law. So the really crucial thing to get here is the why. What gives a country the right to do this? For its own nationals, the justification is pretty clear. Your nationality's kind of like a social contract. But for non-nationals, the logic is totally different. It's not based on what passport you hold. It's based on the idea that certain crimes, think human trafficking or terrorism, are just so awful they're condemned by the whole world, and that universal condemnation gives any nation the legitimacy to prosecute them. But that whole idea of prosecuting foreigners for what they do in other countries, well, that brings us to the most debated part of this whole topic. It's a very controversial power. I mean, think about it. Applying your laws to someone else's citizens in their own country, that's a big deal. It kicks up all these really thorny questions. Is this stepping on the other country's sovereignty? When does a useful legal tool cross the line and become a form of legal overreach, basically one country just imposing its will on another? And this points to one of the biggest risks. You can end up with bad regulation because of fragmentation. See, when lots of countries all try to apply their own laws globally, you don't get a clear, coherent system. You get a confusing mess, a patchwork of conflicting rules that creates a ton of uncertainty for international business and diplomacy. And that brings us to the big question for our time. In a world of global finance, borderless data that moves in a blink, and internet crime, the old rules of physical territory just seem less and less relevant. But if one country's laws can reach everywhere, whose laws should they be? Who gets to write the rulebook for our interconnected world? It's a question that lawyers, leaders, and all of us will be grappling with for decades to come.